Change the climate, building power at the intersection of race, economics, and climate, created by Power, a faithful resistance project. Green jobs, the potential future for our city. We are in a moment. Philadelphia is the largest poor city in America. I can't get my head around that yet. Unemployment strikes 1 in 4 residents in North Philadelphia. People struggle to put food on the table or pay their utility bills. Yet, there is an opportunity to tackle these challenges by building out a just transition to a green and renewable energy economy. A green economy is not just an imagination, it is emerging in real life. Take Serenity Solar, for example, one of the first projects developed in North Philadelphia that provides clean energy, cuts the utility bill, and has trained and hired residents from North Philadelphia. Let's look at Philadelphia Urban Creators, an urban farm just north of Temple University that trains youth and neighborhood residents to grow food and works with the community to provide healthy and affordable foods that are otherwise redlined out of the neighborhood. Realizing environment, equity, and opportunity in green jobs is not a pipe dream. It can be a reality. Can you picture 10,000 urban creators or 100,000 Serenity Solars? How different would our city look? A faith-based journey into the heart of racial, economic, and climate justice. We can realize this vision of environment, equity, and opportunity right here in Philadelphia. But to do this, we must take a step back and understand the deep inequities that we face today so we can build better solutions. We need to examine how the current economy fails Black and brown residents, how the climate crisis will make it harder to survive, and why building out a green job strategy can create what Dr. King called the beloved community. What does race, economics, and the climate have to do with building a just and beloved community? We turn to moral leaders of our time. We must choose community and care of the earth over chaos and greed. This was said by Reverend William Barber III, North Carolina NAACP, Moral Mondays. Today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment, so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So says Pope Francis.
Fossil fuels overheat the planet, causing disruption in the climate, more natural disasters such as storms and flooding, less stability in food systems. Our communities are paying the price of an out-of-control fossil fuel industry that is enriching the few but causing harm to the many. Environmental racism is nothing new. In an unequal society, those at the bottom of the economic ladder, often Black and brown people, suffer the most. We see that the system is racially and economically unfair, hurting poor people and Black and brown people with toxins, unemployment, and unhealthy jobs, even as we are told that our communities do not care about these issues. The drive for fossil fuels is leading to deeper destruction and violence in our communities, locally through pollution, nationally like the Dakota Pipeline, and globally in the war over oil. But this extraction and injustice is not recent history. It is a history rooted in the original sins of this nation, slavery and genocide. The wealth gap and racism that we see today have roots in a broken story. Cheap energy extracted from the earth and from humans drove industrialization. Wastes and toxins polluted the air, water, and land of the poorest communities. Cheap energy with exploited and forced labor produced the huge wealth the developed world controls today. The United States continued this original sin by displacing and murdering Native Americans for their land and later coal, oil, and natural gas. The plantation system is seen in our mass incarceration systems. And even like those enslaved before who lived in horrid working conditions, people in prison face similar toxic realities from penal labor to inadequate food and unhealthy environments. The fossil fuel industry has left its dirty footprint all over the globe in a trail of ruined local economies, fouled air, polluted rivers and streams, decimated farmland, and broken communities. We have more in common than we realize. Black lung, asthma, mass incarceration, a climate catastrophe. These are all condemnations of death by big business through the extraction of fossil fuels, labor, and life. As people of faith, we know the face of injustice. We inherit a 3,000-year-old freedom story, first told in the biblical book of Exodus. This story starts with oppression.
Fossil fuels cause climate crisis and make inequity worse. Let's take a look at the pyramid of fossil fuel oppression with a small ruling few that is propped up by the ramrods of iniquity. The ramrods propping the pyramid are racism, extreme wealth gap, money in politics, and corporate greed. Without these inequities, the pyramid of fossil fuel oppression could not stay standing. Pollution. On this map, the red dots represent the sites and routes of fossil fuel infrastructure. The map is divided into neighborhoods. Using census data, we have color-coded our map to reflect the percentage of Black people who live in each neighborhood. The darker the shade on the map, the higher the percentage of Black residents. This alone tells a shameful story about who gets to enjoy the benefits and who gets to enjoy toxic air, toxic water, declining property values, disinvestment, and triple the asthma rate of the general population. These are all costs that the fossil fuel industry does not take into account when it considers the cost of energy. We are paying the price for their profits. There is a term for what we are seeing: sacrifice zone. A sacrifice zone is a geographic area that has been permanently impaired by environmental damage or economic disinvestment. These zones are most commonly found in low-income and communities of color. The concept of sacrifice zones was first discussed during the Cold War as a likely result of nuclear fallout. Not just sacrifice as in we all have to sacrifice by turning off lights and driving less, but sacrifice as in ground zero for obliteration. The ultimate definition of whose life doesn't matter. According to a publication from the National Institute of Health, sacrifice zones are often fence-line communities of low income and people of color, or hotspots of chemical pollution where residents live immediately adjacent to heavy polluted industries or military bases. Quite often, this pattern of unequal protection constitutes environmental racism. Poorer health outcomes. This is what poor health outcomes look like in Philadelphia. Your health outcome is determined by your race and where you live. In Philadelphia, Black and brown people have shorter life expectancies because of where one lives. In the majority Black neighborhood, Strawberry Mansion, life expectancy is 68 years. In the majority white neighborhood of Old City, the expectancy is 88 years. A 20-year gap. This gap can be traced to higher rates of pollution that correlates with diseases such as asthma, lung disease, and cancer. In the health community, the sources of poorer health outcomes in Black and brown communities are known as HONDAs: hypertension, obesity, non-compliance, diabetes, and asthma. Witnessing environmental racism. Black Americans suffer from a disproportionate share of the toxic burden compared to the middle class. Majority Black communities fare worse even than predominantly white communities living in deep poverty. This is environmental racism. Who gets hurt when race, economics, and climate crisis collide? These plagues feed each other and fuel other problems. As climate change continues, it will make essential needs more insecure. Without intervention, rising seas, rivers, and water threaten to subsume 21% of Philadelphia's landmass, which will hasten land displacement and spread water contamination and lead to water insecurity. Loss of land and more intense weather and droughts will impact food supply and increase prices, creating food insecurity. Increasing days of oppressive heat and pollution will threaten air quality and expose health vulnerabilities like asthma. More intense weather will place higher demand on energy and drive up rates to heat or cool their homes, leading to energy insecurity. Climate crisis makes life a lot worse for people who are already having a hard time. Water insecurity. As we look at the slides, take a moment to note any patterns that you observe. This is what water insecurity looks like in Philadelphia. Yet, water insecurity and scarcity are changing because of people power. Organized efforts pressured City Council to create water as a human right and instill an income-based payment plan. Flooding and land loss. This is what land loss looks like and could look like in Philadelphia. Not only does land loss from flooding threaten the lives of communities, mostly Eastwick and the River Wards, flooding also threatens major job centers that many of our constituents work in. Hospitality and service sector. The airport, for example, would be underwater. Flooding also threatens migration inward to higher elevation. North and Northwest Philly, driving people out who can't afford increasing rents. Food insecurity. This is what food insecurity looks like in Philadelphia. Locally, people of color are more likely to experience food apartheid, where access and affordability to healthy foods are absent compared to more affluent and white areas. The yellow lines in the map show these neighborhoods. As the crisis grows, so will the price and quality of our food, leaving those without access now worse off. Homelessness and housing insecurity. This is what housing insecurity looks like in Philadelphia. There are only 35 affordable units for every 100 extremely low income households, and that number is $23,000 per year. Worse, the combination of utility bills, rent, and low wages is a toxic mix for the majority of the city's population of color and low income that contributes to the increased risk of eviction or foreclosure. Energy insecurity. This is what energy insecurity looks like in Philadelphia. Which communities bear the brunt of people not being able to heat or cool their homes? What does this mean for families? Many families and social workers have cited utility shutoffs as the leading cause for Child Protective Services to remove children from homes. I'm going to repeat that. What does this mean for families? Many families and social workers have cited utility shutoffs as the leading cause for Child Protective Services to remove children from homes. Now, what did you see in each of these slides? From pollution to the insecurities we face, we see the same neighborhoods. These insecurities hit our city's Black and low-income residents the hardest. As climate crisis worsens, those of us in these communities will be the first to feel the pain.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King famously said, "It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." While climate chaos disrupts and impacts Black and brown communities first and hardest, we are ultimately all tied into this together. Back to the Bible. Who remembers the 10th plague that befell the people of Egypt? The plague that finally broke into Pharaoh's hard heart and forced him to let the people go? It was the death of the firstborn. Our own children paying the price that woke even Pharaoh up. We stood up to Pharaoh just as today we stand up to the pharaohs of the fossil fuel industry. God parted the Red Sea back then, and we have the God-given imagination and commitment to build a clean energy economy that works for all today. Crossing today's Red Sea means making a just transition to a clean energy economy that leaves no one behind. As people of faith, we keep our eyes on the prize and head toward the promised land of renewable energy jobs, clean air, and water and a healthy future for all of our families. We will not let the lies and divisiveness of the fossil fuel industry turn us back. We don't just want solar, wind, or geothermal energy. We want all these forms of safe energy with inclusive, healthy jobs for all, and a fair transition for workers who now work in the fossil fuel industry, but will need new jobs in order for life to continue on the planet. We don't want to repeat the past. We claim this opportunity to truly build the beloved community. In the words of Wangari Maathai, the 2004 Nobel Peace Laureate and founder of the Green Belt Movement, today we are faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking, so that humanity stops threatening its life support system. We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds and, in the process, heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole of creation in all its diversity, beauty, and wonder. Recognizing that sustainable development, democracy, and peace are indivisible is an idea whose time has come. Power's framework for building beloved community, racial and economic justice on a livable planet. We hold the intersection of race and economics as key lenses of the climate conversation. We make front and center the voices of people most impacted by poverty, racism, and climate crisis. Black, brown, poor, and immigrant communities and allies are building a multi-faith, multiracial movement to transform the old energy economy into an inclusive, clean energy economy. We believe the rights and dignity of workers are essential to any transition from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable one. We stand for healthy lives for all, pathways into green jobs, local and inclusive investment in green infrastructure, solutions that build economic opportunity, lift people out of poverty, and challenge racism as we work for a livable planet. We build bridges between urban and rural communities, the United States and the global communities, to create a racially and economically just movement that is both very local and very universal, putting community and care of the earth over exploitation and greed. Guiding questions. We ask, who is at risk? Who is benefiting from new opportunities in clean energy, and how do we put the most vulnerable humans at the center of solutions for climate disaster? How do we build a world of racial, economic, and climate justice? Answering the call, demanding green jobs. One way we aim to answer these questions is by listening to the call from community. The Power community put forward a challenge. We must tackle poverty by creating a living wage and living wage jobs. Local renewable energy jobs and investment offer economic opportunity while supporting a healthy and viable planet. The potential for green jobs. We could lift at least 1 in 5 families out of poverty with strategic, smart, and targeted investments in green jobs, ranging from increased transit opportunities and building out local food systems to creating solar throughout the city. For example, this chart shows just minimal investments that the city could do to create jobs for people in poverty. If we invested in public transportation that connected people from North Philly to jobs across the region within a 30-minute commute, we could expand job opportunities. If we invested in building out local food systems or zero-waste systems like recycling and composting, we could create over 1,000 long-term living wage jobs. Power Local Green Jobs campaign. Even when state level and national government is heavily influenced by the fossil fuel industry, which has a powerful lobby and makes huge campaign donations, we are finding local solutions at the city and regional levels. The Power Local Green Jobs campaign, a faith-based campaign sponsored by Power and the Earth Quaker Action Team, is a potent example of how to move forward even under difficult circumstances. We call on our energy corporations to be leaders in addressing both climate crisis and extreme inequality. PECO is the biggest electric utility in our area. We demand that PECO, 1, increase the purchase of local solar power so that 20% of PECO's electricity comes from its local service area by the year 2025. 2, spur solar installation and community ownership in high unemployment areas, starting in North Philadelphia. 3, prioritize local wealth building by calling for energy produced by local workers, paid living wages, and by supporting low-income ownership of solar energy. When PECO rises to meet these expectations, it will have the potential to create thousands of jobs, from construction and installation to maintenance and supply chain. PECO executives say they are caring very deeply about cheap energy, but they cannot take the lead on climate justice because they have to buy the least cost energy, even if it pollutes and destroys communities. We must redefine costs. We say, what does PECO count when tallying the cost of so-called cheap energy? Does PECO count these costs to us, our communities, and the planet? Does PECO count this cost to you? Asthma and respiratory disease, emergency room trips, lost school and work days. Does PECO count this cost to neighborhoods and communities? Lost economic opportunity and homelessness, declining property values, heat-related deaths. Does PECO count this cost to our planet? Rising sea levels, coastal flooding, drought, crop failure and famine, extreme weather events, superstorms, wildfires, climate refugees, green jobs and renewable energy. If PECO purchased 20% of its electricity from Philadelphia rooftops, it could create 4,000 to 8,000 jobs in construction and installation, jobs that often average $20 to $26 per hour. Renewable energy can generate 2 to 3 more times wealth in a community when jobs are local and ownership is maintained by the community compared to some outside entity. If focused in communities like North Philadelphia, this can help tackle the racial wealth gap in this city.